We've gotten a few questions on the blog about what kind of modifications we've done to the Frijole to get it ready for the Nora race, and we're going to talk about a few of those now. A couple of things we did to the swing arm is we sent it out to Doug Roll and he reinforced it. He added some strap to the swing arm to strengthen it, as well as double sheared the lower shock mount. We also had the axle adjusters improved by Tim over at Gigacycle Garage. They're solid billet blocks as opposed to the original lollipops in there. It gives it a little bit more rigidity, stronger, so those swing arm tubes won't collapse. We've also added a chain slider to the swing arm. Yeah, we had to change the gearing dramatically on this bike. So we called up PBI and they offer a 65 tooth rear sprocket. Put it on there, made all the difference in the world. The front is 22 and the rear is 65. For the top shock mount, same theory as the bottom, double shear. Bill and Westy made that strap to capture that top shock mount, just to provide more strength on that bolt. And the bolt in there is actually grade 10. So it's pretty heavy duty up there. The air cleaner we're using is a standard 4-inch air cleaner for a CV, but we've done a few things to help filter that dust and that silt, because that is our #1 enemy out there in the desert, is that silt. If we get silt in that engine, it's over. So 4-inch paper filament first, then we have a uni foam filter over that, then we have a second uni foam filter over that, and then lastly we have a pre-charger over that. So we kind of went a little overboard for the filtering, but I think it's going to be to our benefit. For our exhaust, we used a Biltwell exhaust kit in conjunction with a Super Trap muffler. Our goal was to have the pipe high off the ground, away from rocks, and tucked in as far as possible to the bike to keep it from getting damaged. We used a Super Trap muffler we sectioned it 3 inches to make it shorter to fit between the oil tank and the shock. The muffler exits right in front of the shock. We have been monitoring the temperature on there, and there's only about a 20-degree difference between the passenger side to the driver's side. For the rear exhaust mount, we used a hanger and a cradle. So in the event we do have a nasty get off and there's a little bit of movement in the pipe from the force, we can adjust it forward or aft in the cradle with the frame mount being in the same position. So it gives for a little bit of fudge room in case we need it. Standard breathing on Evo Sportsters are through the head bolts. This created an issue for us. We don't want silt being sucked into those heads and creating catastrophic damage to our engine during the race. So what we did to fix that problem is we took some Buell XB valve covers that have essentially PCV valves in the heads that are one-way valves. On this setup, the PCV valves breathe into a puke can with a brass filter on there that we're going to clean twice a day maybe. Something that's new to me on this build that I've never done before was putting sheathing on oil line and electrical lines. Even the brake lines, we have it on there. And what that does is it prevents any punctures, cuts, frays from rubbing from these hoses or wires rubbing. A lot of you guys know heat is the enemy. We are going to be in the desert. We are going to be lugging this bike, so it's going to generate some heat. So something we did to dissipate some of that heat is we added an XR400 oil cooler on the neck of the bike. It adds a couple of ounces of oil, which is, benefits cooling, as well as gets airflow to cool that oil. Being that the stock brake pedal is all aluminum and vulnerable to braking, we fabbed up our own brake pedal that is more tucked into the bike, made out of steel as opposed to aluminum, which allows for bending it back in the field if needed. Another thing that we did on this brake pedal is the peg. We used an Alloy Art folding one, so when this bike does get tipped over, it just folds and gets tucked in nicely and won't create any extra stress. For the wiring and electrics on this bike, we wanted to keep it simple. We have redundant batteries in case one goes bad out on the course. Same goes for the coils. We have a dash panel that's right behind the number plate that has circuit breakers that are resettable, so there's no need to carry fuses out on the trail. It's also got an oil pressure light to give a visual aid for our rider. The hand controls we kept simple and traditional to a dirt bike. We've got Fastway 2-inch risers. We're using Pro Taper Adventurer bars to give us some extra height in there. We've got Cycra Pro Bend hand guards, Motion Pro throttle. We've got our Biltwell thruster grips. For our navigation, we got a Low Ranch GPS, pretty much a glorified fish finder, and we got that from PCI Radios. They really took care of us. They even gave us a class on how to use this thing. It's pretty complicated. For our lighting up front, we went to Baja Designs. They set us up with a Squadron Pro headlight. We used their fairing that they sent with us. We added a Sons of Anarchy fairing on top of that, a little windscreen. For 2 reasons, so we can be tough in the desert as well as give some protection to that low ranch from some roost. Sure, it is a dirt bike front fender, but as it reads, we've got an authentic Harley-Davidson thermal die cut sticker to let you guys know that this is a Harley. For our controls and skid plate, we started off with a Hugo Moto kit. We heavily modified it to suit our needs. Bring the feet back a little bit for a more comfortable riding position so you're not so hunched over the bike, and more rugged when we fall over. Another little thing we did is add a little perforated screen in front of the voltage regulator, just to keep some of those rocks off of those heat sink fins. Y'all will notice a couple of straps on the bike, one on the front fender, one over the rear of the seat. Those really come into play if the bike's fallen over and if the rider's out there by himself and he just can't find a good place to grab. We upgraded our rear brake caliper to a Tokiko 4-piston. Tim from Gigacycle made us a carrier. It's all one-piece billet. Some of y'all might notice that the shifter is backwards. We did that for a reason. It's on purpose. It is GP shifting, so first is up and all the rest are down. The reason we did that is to keep that shifter from hanging out in the middle of nowhere, vulnerable to being broken off. Our buddy Mark the Butcher gave us a little insight on the Rekluse auto clutch. All the riders love it. It's the best mod on the bike. So what a Rekluse clutch is, essentially, is a slipper clutch. You can come to a complete stop being in gear and the bike will not stall. This is an advantage to our riders in case they get into a hairy situation, a sticky situation where they need to put their foot down but they don't have enough time to shift into neutral and not stall. Eric Westergaard, he's got the most experience when it comes to suspension, so I'm going to turn it over to him to explain the fine details.
They call me Westy here. I'm the product manager at Biltwell. Got a lot of experience racing. I started racing in 1983, done multiple disciplines, 3, 4-wheelers, dirt bikes, all kinds of stuff. So I got tasked with the suspension side of things on the Frijole. Some of the challenges we ran into or obstacles we were dealing with were we were going to stick with the stock frame. And so that was where we had to kind of set our shock lengths and things, ride height based on a couple of constraints that are just inherent in the bike itself. I worked with Doug Roll at Roll Design on quad suspension. We created a service center. That's where a lot of my experience in this came in, and the reason we went with Elka was because Doug's knowledge in the off-road racing world and experience, his win ratio can't be denied, one of the winningest brands in off-roading. Going to him for the reinforcement of the swing arms plus the shocks gave us a single point of someone who really could help with the tough stuff, with the details, dialing in the shocks, where we were mounting them, the shock length and the spring rates. So when we were reinforcing the swing arm, one of the things we took into account was the shock length, and we realized that we needed to create a longer shock. So we moved the mount down and actually punched through the center of the swing arm to allow us to run a 17-inch shock with the ride height and the steering angle we were trying to do. So Doug created a double shear mount on the swing arm, and it's amazing. It's as good as this swing arm can be. So on the rear shock, the valving that Doug had come up with was pretty on the money right out of the box, but springs needed some work. We had tried a few different options within a couple of days of testing. We tried a couple of combinations, and then we weren't sure if maybe this bike wanted a single rate because combinations were either too soft or a little too stiff. So we tried a longer single rate spring, and it just wasn't right. We couldn't get the sag quite right. So I had one more combination I wanted to try, which was a 600-pound tender spring, 40mm crossover, and a 175-pound mainspring, which gives us a nice softer top of the suspension stroke, and then some good bottom out poundage, and I think we've got it nailed pretty well right now. Front forks took some work. We had Tim at Gigacycle machine our top triple clamp for us. He machined a steer tube, and the top clamp that he made also allowed us to mount the GPR stabilizer. The forks themselves are off 2005 CRF 250, and stock length was too tall. Our steering angle wasn't right, so we knew we needed to lower it to get the bike at the ride height we were looking at. And they were also too soft. The bike was 475 pounds, and we needed something to hold it up. So I went to Canon Racecraft and had custom wound springs to the right length and the weight. And the weight was determined after talking with them and with Bob at Precision Concepts, who we went to help us get the front end correct. We decided on a 0.7 kilogram per millimeter spring rate, which is extremely heavy, but for the bike, that's what was necessary. He valved the front end to, I believe, what is equivalent to his Africa Twin, because the weight's very similar. And at this point, with the ride height, which is 2.5 inches shorter than stock, gives us the steering angle that we desired, and the bottom out poundage, and the ride is phenomenal. At this point, I'm really happy with the suspension. I think the bike is set up as good as a Sportster setup to race desert can be. The ride height feels right, the suspension feels fantastic. Rob's done an amazing job being our mechanic, keeping it tuned, listening to feedback, and getting our gearing right, things like that. The bike, it's really a blast to ride. It's a lot of fun.